first Switch was released in 2017 and it did not age well. So after 8 years, everyone were looking for a change and Switch 2 was announced. Now, it is looking like a portable from 2025, but is there anything else but the new design? Well, on the 2nd of April 2025, we had presentation from Nintendo called Nintendo Direct, which delivered much more than I personally have expected. Some formalities first, Switch 2 will be released on the 5th of June 2025, pre-order will be open on the 9th of April 2025 as well, with introductory price being $450 or 470 euros, which by the way costs 50 euros more than base version of Steam Deck with LCD screen and the same 256GB of storage, but about it a bit later. Fun fact is that there will be two versions of Switch 2nd generation. Version for Japan with Japanese language only and international version for the rest of the world, which is important because version for Japan will cost only 50,000 yen or $350 with international version available in Japan as well, but for 70,000 yen, which is $480. And not to let aside latest news, tariffs for the world announced by United States government made Nintendo stop pre-order for Switch on the territory of the United States, but release date stays the same for now. But back to the presentation. I was not a fan of Nintendo Switch almost from the release of Steam Deck. Almost everything screamed that a lot of things are off, but after Nintendo Direct presentation this year, I caught myself on the thought that I'm interested in Switch 2 release. So good the presentation was. Maybe that's the fact of other hardware presentations happening each year and showing so little change that Nintendo Switch 2 seems like a great leap forward. But anyway, let's begin with second generation of Switch having NVIDIA chip inside. So the Switch will have DLSS instead of IFSR, so get me right, FSR is good, but DLSS is much better. At least on PC, so I have my expectations high about this part. The question is about the base power of the console, but we'll leave that to the release of the console itself. Feature-wise, insiders state that the architecture of the chip inside Switch 2 is the same as RTX 30 series GPUs, so DLSS upscaling, ray tracing and tensor cores inside is a real possibility. The design, as mentioned before, was changed and the screen has improved from 6.2 inch in the first generation to 7.9 inch in the second. The resolution also got improved from 720p to 1080p, as well as refresh rate from 60Hz in the first generation to 120Hz in the second. And unfortunately here we'll have only LCD screen but with HDR support, which feels like a downgrade from OLED screen. That choice in terms of screen is at least questionable, since the same Steam Deck has proven that for a portable 720p or 800p in the version of Steam Deck is the best choice, same as refresh rate of 60 to 90 Hz in terms of both battery life and quality. But here the only thing I can say defending Switch 2 is that Nintendo exclusives maybe will support native 1080p and 120Hz since they require much less power than other games adapted for Switch. Get me right on this one, Mario games will be pretty good, while the same Cyberpunk will look more than questionable on 1080p screen. And of course forget about 120 FPS, it will be a miracle if you'll get 30 to 45 FPS there. But about games a bit later. So hardware was mostly created for Nintendo games and I guess that's Nintendo way, so let's just see what will be as the result. And of course, dimensions of Switch 2 have changed and now it is something between first generation of Switch and Steam Deck as seen right now. Another update, and not only in terms of design, is the new dock station with up to 4K 60Hz support or 1440p up to 120Hz support. That's obvious that very small number of games will use such resolution, but support for standard TVs and monitors resolution being 1440p or 4K is a nice thing. And you will be looking not only on the sharp menu but also at Metroid Prime 4 with two modes available. 4K 60 FPS HDR quality mode and 1080p 120 FPS HDR, so performance mode, but that's in docked mode, and 1080p 60 FPS quality and 720p 120 FPS performance in handheld mode. So obviously that's not native resolution, and by the way, throughout the whole presentation Nintendo was showing different features created by Nvidia and available on PC already, positioning it like they have created them, like the same DLSS in games or Nvidia broadcast app being integrated in the system for communication. In any way, so you get how serious the second generation is. DockStation now has active cooling, so your Switch 2 doesn't die from rendering 4K 60 FPS after 5 minutes in game. And now about the games, and the games from Nintendo look perfect. For example, Mario Kart World, which is the first exclusive game for Nintendo Switch 2, as well as 6 other games for which paid patches were created following PlayStation example. Price on this patch is not known for now, but I doubt it being more than $30. But the question I have is the collection of supported games with this patch on the release date. So of course Zelda Breath of the Wild and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and it looks amazing with new resolution and normal FPS for 2025 and supporting HDR. And since we are talking about Zelda, Nintendo have created an app in your smartphone including a map navigation, QR code creator and reader for custom builds to share and some other things specifically for Zelda games. So something similar last time I have seen with Fallout 4 when P-Boy could be used IRL using your smartphone and specific mount for your arm. But back to the games, and the rest two games with patch for Switch 2 is Mario Party and Kirby. Like, that's not first games that come to my mind when thinking about Switch library. Like, they have games which are suffocating on the Switch first generation, needing a patch right now, like Xenoblade 2 or 3. And why were not these games chosen for normal FPS and resolution patch is a big question for me personally. Or let's say Mario Odyssey, which would look incredible in the same 4K in a docked version for the same Switch 2 console. But all in all, it's pretty odd that although second generation will have almost full compatibility with games from the first generation, that second gen patch will receive only 6 games or so. Of course, Nintendo has published the list of games not available for Switch 2 using compatibility with the first one, but all of them are under investigations for now, so most probably the problem will be solved. From well-known titles, it will be Doom Eternal and Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus, like it's not supported for now. In terms of the new games, like the same Mario Kart, a new physical copy of the game will be delivered using new red cartridges, which will have greater speed comparing to the old ones. And talking about speed, Switch 2 will require new standard of micro SD cards, not supporting old ones. And of course, the console itself now will have 256 GB of memory instead of 32 GB in the first generation. But the console itself still will have kickstand for positioning on the table, and now it will have 2 USB Type-C ports at the top and the bottom of the console for accessories and charging the console while being positioned on the surface using kickstand. Now also console from Nintendo will have bigger active cooling as seen on the renders, which is one of the reasons for the console to become larger in dimensions. New thing for Nintendo is GameChat, or in-game communication service being available in the console itself. For those who didn't know, for Switch first generation, in order to communicate, you needed to download separate app from Nintendo and to use your phone as an in-game communication device, and in-game communication required monthly subscription. So starting with Switch 2, now in-game communications will be available on the console itself with hardware C button for GameChat. So essentially that's something like Discord but from Nintendo with audio, video sharing options and gameplay sharing as well. The only problem being resolution and FPS of shared gameplay. Even on presentation, the resolution was awful and FPS looked like 10 to 15 at most. And here is where Nvidia Technologies comes in. Built-in microphone will filter noises, sounds from the game and voice, just like Nvidia Broadcast app for PC. so the person you talk to will hear your voice only even if you're far from the console. But that's not it. NVIDIA Broadcast on PC has option for cutting human from the background and following your face position during video chat. So Nintendo now will sell a Nintendo Switch 2 camera for $50. My question here is, in which closed in 2010 factory warehouse did Nintendo found hardware for this camera? Since on presentation the quality was awful, with FPS being around the same 10 to 15 FPS. But that's not where camera usage ends. Switch to camera is more like Kinect from Nintendo, since it is deeply integrated into some games like Mario Party, which will be upgraded for Switch 2 as mentioned before. The only problem is GameChat usage is restricted behind monthly subscription, but Nintendo is so thrilled about their own Discord that till March 2026, GameChat will be free for everyone. And now JoyCons, which are being connected magnetically by the way, it can be used like a goddamn mouse. From the games supporting this option, I've seen decent realization in Metroid 4 Prime, which essentially is a first-person shooter, and some game which looked like nothing specific at first, but just look how it is being controlled. Like, should I say that such type of controlling option is not as convenient as it looks, since Joy-Cons are pretty small, not ergonomic, and this use case scenario will require you to have pretty big flat surface, like I guess you've guessed it before me. So, well, from exclusiveness on Switch, second generation Mario Kart World now has lots of biomes and up to 24 racers per race, and as developers state, you are not limited by the road only. To be honest, I would not buy it personally, but I get it that Mario Kart 8 had more than 75 million copies sold, so I guess for that people it will be a great update. So I guess the only exclusive for Switch 2 on the release date of the console itself, which is Mario Kart World, is being positioned as a system seller because of previous parts of Mario Kart success. Like, Nintendo will even have separate event about Mario Kart World on the 17th of April. Also was announced that in subscription service Nintendo Classic will now be present games from GameCube, with one of it being Zelda Wind Waker. And Nintendo are bragging that the game looks and feels better than on the original console. I guess very little amount of people will remember that Nintendo has already released remaster of this game, which runs in HD 12 years ago on Wii U, and so I guess paying $25 a month for a subscription to play this game is much more financially beneficial instead of releasing the same remaster for one-time pay of $70. But so, now about the third-party games being released on Nintendo Switch 2. Hollow Knight Silksong being released on Switch in 2025, but about huge ports of the games to Switch, Elden Ring, Hitman, Split Fiction, and even Cyberpunk 2077. But what unites all of these games? They are looking awful if you were looking presentation in a normal resolution. That's especially noticeable in Split Fiction gameplay, which not only is very blurry, but also characters have some field around them, which reminds me about how DLSS Auto Performance picture looks like. But keeping in mind what we see in Nintendo-owned games, these third-party games should not look as bad. The trailers shown have awful FPS, blurry picture, and artifacts from something like DLSS upscaling. I really don't think Switch 2 has such weak performance. The reason behind such poor realization, as I see it, is Nintendo sending dev kits to developers at the latest time possible, so developers literally had no time to optimize their games for the new console. So I think, and for sure I hope, that the games which gameplay looked awful during presentation will look much better after release of the console. But the one and only game which made lots of noise during and after the presentation came from Software called DuskBloods, and when watching this trailer after From Software name appeared, everything looked like Bloodborne or maybe Bloodborne 2 trailer. Like, some characters look similar. Steampunk Victorian aesthetics look similar. Words blood sounded several times in trailer. And at the end, we are being sad that the game will be released in 2026 and it will be switched to exclusive. So, from Software fans, I guess we're not happy with it. But we got information that the game will be some PvEVP game developed by From Software, with the head of the development being Miyazaki himself, like The Verge is stating. But Nintendo is positioning the game as it is multiplayer game from Software, and no more info for now. We'll also get some time after a new Kirby game, and the final trailer was Donkey Kong game, which, to be honest, looks pretty fun. But talking about the price, as I've said in the beginning, $450 or 470 euros, which is a bit too much in my opinion, but that is not the biggest problem price-wise. Nintendo has increased price for physical copies up to 90 euros. So we'll get one exclusive for second generation Switch on release date, around 6 improved games from Switch 1 and other games coming later one by one like Metroid, Donkey Kong, DuskBloods and so on. Well, that's Nintendo way, and their way includes selling demo for Switch to console, showing its capabilities, when even Sony didn't make Astro Playroom a paid demo for PS5. But even everything that you can count to objective downsides of the console do not matter for Nintendo fanbase, which will be thrilled and will buy literally everything the company produces.
2, 1!
As Bloomberg sees it, if Switch 2 is not a banger, Nintendo doesn't have plan B, since their actives are not diversified as it is with Sony, Xbox and even Valve, and highly depends on the console sales, which were great before, but will this generation share the same fate? That is the question for now. The only thought that I couldn't get out of my head for the whole presentation is how Switch 2 is similar to Lenovo Legion Go, which partially was copied from Switch first generation, with the same unnecessary high refresh rate, high resolution, not OLED screen for some reason, same improved kickstand and even JoyCon being used as a mouse for games, with the difference of Lenovo version looking a bit more ergonomic than Nintendo iteration, and Switch 2 offering 2 Joy-Cons being used as a mouse instead of one in Lenovo Portable. But to be honest, Lenovo Legion Go is pretty bad because of the same reasons as I've mentioned before, the main being the screen. So sad for me seeing these unnecessary so-called improvements in Switch 2, even though I'm not a fan of Nintendo. But in any case, I'll follow the news around Switch 2 release and really hope to see you here a bit later.